Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
I mean, how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, welcome back to the Karma Koala podcast. And in this episode, we're speaking to Dr. Brian Walker from the West Australian Cannabis Party, and he's a senator in West Australia for the past, you must be getting towards the end of your term now, Brian. Are you 3.5 years in or something?
That's right, another 6 months and a bit to the election.
And then you got to do the struggle all over again. So, I mean, look, give us a little bit of background about the West Australian Cannabis Party. I've already spoken to now independent Sophia Moermand, so I'm sort of getting a general sense of the party as it is now. But although you're national, state is still precedent. Is that what I'm sort of understanding?
Yeah, so we were the first ever elected candidates, members of parliament in the world. And it was actually really very exciting. And you could say it's breaking the mold and moving into the established world of politics featuring cannabis. People still now think we're a single issue party, not realizing the extent to which cannabis actually impacts on society. For example, over the last year, 2023, I asked a question of every single portfolio, not just minister, every single portfolio, a question which is cannabis related. So everything touched cannabis.
No, I totally agree with you on that point. But is that not a little bit difficult in Parliament when the main issue with cannabis is you can't have it? I mean, well, you can have medical cannabis, and in Australia, that's a whole nother discussion as well, which we can get into. Asking these questions, you're participating in the parliamentary day to day, but is not the main issue is how do we get cannabis over the line, which I know is extremely difficult with these very conservative Labour state and federal government in Australia at the moment. It just came in the UK. We're going to have exactly, not have the same problem because nothing's even started, but the new Labour Party is probably less likely to regulate parts of the cannabis industry than the prior Tory Party.
Well, that's really interesting because the concept of cannabis isn't about using what used to be an illicit drug. It's not even about making it like alcohol, which is a lot safer than alcohol, of course, as we all know. The concept I have in Parliament for cannabis is if you have lied to us for 90 years about cannabis, where else have you lied? If you have caused people to suffer because you're persecuting the use of a healthy healing herb, which can be misused, but so can everything else, okay? Where else have you crafted laws which are designed to make us less well? And this is a really important question because we're seeing the population is actually under the heel of an elite, but we don't know it. And we think we're in a free country, but we're not. Okay, and so we're being fed by mainstream media, which is doing anything but tell the real truth. In a system,
I mean, the media is only owned by one person in Australia, so that, we know what that family says, and they've said it. Well, we discussed Adelaide before. It's Adelaide rules the world through. I mean, you make a very interesting point, but in terms of now you're coming up for re-election as a Cannabis Party, and you did get in on preferences on the first time. How do you explain that to the voters, and you're a local member, you can explain it to your voters, and hopefully because you've been in the upper house for that period of time, they sort of understand the subtleties behind that. But I would suggest that in other you need to get more upper house seats. How does that come across with somebody who's putting themselves up for the first time? Because that's a little bit more difficult, isn't it?
Well, we could look at the UK election just now, which has 2/3 of the seat held by a party which won 1/3 of the votes. And you wonder, are we really talking about democracy? I think we're not. In Australia, at least in Western Australia, the Legislative Assembly, the lower house, is first past the post. And the upper house is actually, at least it used to be, with the preferential vote. It still is to some degree. So we're getting an element here of not just who has got the most votes, but for which particular party or person does the community as a whole agree needs to represent us, our voice in Parliament. And that really is what needs to happen. We need to have not just the first past the post is very much, I've won, I'm now democratically elected. Even if only 1/3 of the population voted for me, I'm going to make decisions for the other 2/3, whether you like it or no. And I don't like that. It just doesn't work for me. I very much believe in doing what the people need. Not necessarily what the people want, because what the people want may not be with the education of what's actually necessary. For example, nuclear power, we could talk about that, but if you challenge people now, you're looking here for emotions, not actual reality. So I think it's important to have people who represent the people. Now, here my problem starts, because I came into Parliament, and the first thing I did was swear an oath to serve the people of Western Australia. And I think I'm probably one of the few people in Parliament who actually holds himself to that oath, because everybody else represents the party first, last. So in the coming election, you mentioned that I was mostly elected on preferences. That's true. But in Parliament now, we've been able to make quite large gains, if you like, in awakening the people to the needs to have someone like myself in Parliament. And I do expect we're going to have I'm aiming for 3 members on the upper house in the coming election. And I do note that the Labour Party is still going to win, I think, but the numbers will come down. The Liberal, the current opposition, the numbers will go up a little bit, but not much. At the crossbench is going to actually be much larger. And I do anticipate 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 separation approximately in the upper house.
And what the crossbench, there's yourself, there's the Greens. Who else is represented in Western Australia?
Well, at the moment, just a lone voice for the Daylight Savings Party. But we have 2 independents now. Sophia, of course, has become independent, and Ben Dawkins, who was Labour but was kicked out after he was elected because of his issues with the law. In the coming Parliament, I'm fully expecting members to be there who represent the far right. Pauline Hanson's One Nation.
Well, that's exactly what I was about to ask you. So it's almost harder for you to find a middle ground with those guys than the ruling party, isn't it? Or, and sometimes working with them negates what you're trying to do on, literally on the other side of the fence. Although I noticed that Pauline, I haven't heard from her for ages, thank God, because I'm out of the country. But she was all medical cannabis 18 months ago. Although I have a funny feeling she might have invested some money in a company, which is why she was so keen. That's always my guess in Australia with politicians.
Well, it's funny, I've been asking my staff ever since I got into Parliament, where do you think I actually stand on that spectrum, left, right? Because I don't actually agree that there's a spectrum. I think there's a variety of opinions. And for most of the things that are happening, I, as a practicing doctor, tend to take a more of a view of the social needs because of people who are suffering mental health problems. And I have much more of a need for looking after how the community works together. On the other hand, I am very firm in the idea that we ought to have good financial laws to underpin the services that we need. So chucking money at a problem and just asking later where does it come from, I think is a poor idea. So I'm not a fan of characterizing people by where you're positioned on a spectrum. I'm actually more of a fan of the idea of what serves the people. It may be an old refrain, if you like, but what do the people need? And bearing in mind that in WA, which is a very large state, the needs of the people can be very different from the far north to the far south.
Yeah.
And so any party that I lead, I would be expecting people to represent those people, not the party. So it's a discussion about what do we as a group want for how do we help our people?
So you went to the electorate last time round on a pretty single issue. Are you saying this time round you're going on multiple issues with cannabis leading that as the main thrust? So I suppose the question there is, in the other states, the Cannabis Party are probably just single issue still. Do you have to work with the national body to say what you're? I'm trying to understand how the Cannabis Party of Australia is working as it organically grows, and how, is there somebody who's like a chief whip somewhere who says you can campaign on that, but you really can't campaign on that?
Oh, that's an interesting question. The Cannabis Party in Australia is very new, of course. And so when we first came into power, it was very much a kindergarten group trying to find its way in the university level of politics. So it's a very steep learning curve. And it's also true that the Cannabis Party is divided. Those who are purely, we want cannabis talked about, and those who are aware of the far greater implications of cannabis. And that's the group I really belong to. Now, I think anyone who is looking at the politics of the people of Australia would realize about 70–80% of the people agree that cannabis should be at least decriminalized, if not legalized. And there's war against drugs. Everyone knows. The police, I was listening to a police officer just today. They acknowledge that the war against drugs was never won, ever, and it's always been losing. So why are we prosecuting it still? We should.
And in Australia, I mean, I just jump in because in Australia, I have a little column that's called Bust of the Day, and I follow cannabis busts all around the world, just for my own sort of amusement and education half the time. But the uptick in Australia has been huge, and the industrial size of these grows now beats most other countries except for the US, hands down.
Well, we know about 10–11% of the population are regular consumers of cannabis. And by declaring war on drugs, what we've basically done as a society is say to the criminals, here, that's your business, you run with it. So your billions of dollars, which you could be earning, we'll give that to you, and we'll not build the hospitals we need, we'll not give the childcare centres, we'll not look after the aged people as we should do, because we've given you, the criminals, the right to make profits on a healthy healing herb. I find that obscene.
No, I totally agree with you, because it's not just about giving the black market the money to run with it, but it's also sort of internal politics, because certain people don't want their budgets taken away. So I mean, I think it works on both sides of the coin. And
oh gosh,
I mean,
well,
do you feel that I mean, I suppose the question is, you're in Western Australia, you operate slightly differently from the way the two senators do in Victoria. You've got an ex-Greens guy in New South Wales, so he's politically, he understands how to work in the House in New South Wales. The people I've spoken to up in Queensland seem fairly bright. Do you feel as though there's actually, now you've built this body, it's beginning to sort of balance itself out, and like any political party, people have different points of view, but do you think you're moving forward as a national body that can really work on people like your allies, like the Greens, to really try and understand how to get through a piece of legislation in Canberra that starts to change things? Because the situation on the ground seems completely out of control at the moment. You've got for me, I see a medical system that is basically a de facto adult use system, and then
yes.
And then a black market that is, I would say, has doubled in the last 18 months. So by inaction, various governments over the last 10 years could not have to worry about too much by inaction. But at this stage of the game, it seems that inaction is really going to start causing societal problems sooner rather than later.
Well, Ian McGregor of the Lambert Institute said that the way we're prescribing cannabis now is actually legalization by stealth. And I was speaking to a Labour minister a few months ago who said, yes, cannabis will be legalized within 5 years, she reckons. And didn't explain why they were holding it back, of course, but it is going to happen. So, look, when it comes to drug use in our society, the biggest problem is actually alcohol. And we're cool with that. The fact that most
it is Australia, so it's not just cool; it's national pride, isn't it?
Indeed, but
and this comes from a non-drinker, so
it kills me, it destroys society, and we're good with that. Our Indigenous population is absolutely wrecked by alcohol. And we're cool with that. We should not be. There's a fundamental injustice in what's happening within our system just now, but not just with cannabis, not just with drugs, with everything. I mean, you go to the court system here, there's every chance you're going to get an unfair system here because the courts are actually not being cared for properly. We're not getting justice in the law and order system. We're getting the passing of laws. There's no justice for the people. And I sense very much in our society an uptick in, first of all, disengagement from politics, but also an anger against the status quo. And that must end at some time, maybe not now, but in the not too distant future, in revolution. And I, in fact, am actually calling, I suppose de facto, I am calling for a revolution because the current political system that we have, at least in WA, is not fit for purpose. And can you fix it? I think it has to be broken down and made new.
So, I mean, and do you think it's building up a head of steam with what politicians would call minor parties in order to sort of, start not topple, but make a bit more precarious for the two leading parties, the Labour Party?
There's two things. There's two things. Bearing in mind, 1890 something, the Labour Party started in the back room of a bar, very small, and it's now what it is. And that's the nature of minor parties. We can grow, and we should grow. Bear in mind also that the current system, the left and the right, we've got the Labour and Liberal, they're actually the same, just different flavours of the same. And so voting for that same gives you more of the old. And has the old worked for us? No. I asked a question in Parliament the other month there. I said, 30 years, let's imagine the last 30 years of legislation, law after law after law being passed. Look at then, look at now. Are we any better off now than we were 30 years ago? And the answer is no, we're not. So what are we doing? Are we enhancing the status of our civilization, or are we working against it? And I think that the results show we're actually working against the people, and this cannot be tolerated. It must be changed.
In your state specifically, like anywhere else, money talks, and money is mining in Western Australia, and that's an immovable object. I mean,
that's
for
exactly the path I took.
30 years.
Now that's the path I took, and you're right, because no one really cares about health, which is my jam. They care about the money. Now, a paper we produced last year was a fund. Well, I funded that, but it came from the UWA, and it showed that of the 4-year forward estimates, if we legalize cannabis recreationally, there's $1.25 billion over the 4-year forward estimates from legalizing cannabis. And that's just 5% of the total industry that we'd have, the income we'd have at a government level when it comes to hemp, because we're banning or making hemp difficult because we're frightened of THC, which killed no one in the last, how many years? Okay, but because we're frightened of THC, we've got restrictions on hemp. Now, I did the calculations on a hemp industry based on these figures, and we'd have something like over $60 billion of hemp industry in WA alone, and that would give $20 billion conservatively put at government revenues. And we'd have an innovative industry, because hemp with carbon, for example, is now making bomb-proof covers for ADF vehicles. Okay, why not send this into space? Why not build your own home, that the indigenous people can create their own homes based on good quality hemp to their standards and not to the 4x2, which is not suiting their needs? Why are we, and with that income, we've got $20 billion annually coming in, over the 4-year forwards, coming into our society. How many hospitals are we not building? How much daycare for children are we not creating because we're frightened of THC? Which has killed no one.
I don't disagree with you in any way or form, but the history of cannabis business in Australia is, mining companies were some of the first ones involved because they thought there was a quick buck, and Gina's put some money into. So it's all about follow the money and controlling the money. So these things might all be great, but it's not going to stop them doing. They'll just be making twice as much money as they did before.
Indeed. So this is the equation we need to put in front of the people. Do you want not to have a hospital, because you let the politicians scare you because of THC? Or do we have a revolution where the people say, let's do what's right, let's follow the science, let's follow the evidence, for goodness sakes. And those who are making money selling us to China, carry on by all means, but at least, for goodness sakes, tax them. Let's take a royalty for sending our gas to China or Japan. We're giving it away. Guys, come on. We deserve better than this.
If the Cannabis Party thinking in Australia is moving towards these sorts of issues, I for one feel fairly positive about it. I suppose my issue is persuading how you persuade the wider population with the word cannabis in front of the party, that how you can be in a position to be able to highlight all these other issues, which, look, to the people who are in it every day and educated about it, it's a no-brainer. But if it turns up on Channel 7 News and somebody sees Cannabis Party with a cannabis leaf, and then you talking about other issues, I still think the wider society is going to be a little wary of you still. How do you think the party can get through that?
Well, there's a couple of things. You're quite right. But there's one word you mentioned there, which is really important. And when I was leading the select committee over Southwest Australia and into Czech Republic, Germany, and Israel, everyone was saying this one word over and over again. We need more education of the people, of the politicians, and of course the doctors as well. So this is what we need to do. But you're right. I mean, people are still led by the fear of propaganda, 90 years telling them how bad cannabis is. And so is a name change on the cards? Well, I think we ought to strongly consider it, because the first impressions do count. And so if people are seeing the cannabis leaf and then shutting off, then maybe we ought to reconsider that. You're quite right, but we haven't got that far yet.
No, well, as I say, it's early days. You have to see how the next sets of state elections do, and maybe even are there plans to stand federally in the next federal election? Yes. Did anybody stand in the last one? Michael didn't he, or not?
Yes, they did. You got quite, actually, there was one potential candidate at the final hurdle in Queensland who almost got into federal politics, but he almost kicked Pauline Hanson out. Oh, but the final
that's right. Now I remember that.
Yes.
It was that was actually quite nice to see that Pauline was threatened in her own seat after many years. Maybe that's why she was getting into cannabis, because she realized.
We're anticipating one, maybe two in the next election coming up May of next year.
And do you think you'll be finding more people in the state upper houses in the coming years, or do you think that it's reaching a sort of a zenith? 2, 3, maybe 4 is about as many as you're going to get in each upper house?
Well, actually, what I am working towards, and I won't be happy until we reach this, I'll be working towards creating the Legalized Cannabis Party, in whatever name we give it, as having more than a minor party, but actually coming into major parties area. I would anticipate that we will increase our number to 3 in the next election. I'll be anticipating the election after that. We'll be getting members elected into the assembly. That would be quite nice. And I would anticipate also that as we educate the public into the needs that are not being met and that we would put forward as a policy platform, that they would then say, this is worth a try. Because what I'm putting out just now to all of the public is there's 2 words you need to remember for this election. One is think. The old thinking, that just an unthinking of, they've always voted that way, my parents did, my grandparents did. Stop it. Think for yourself. And the second one is think differently. Not necessarily vote for us. I think you should, but not necessarily. As long as you're thinking and you think differently, then we would naturally come up in the equation. And that gives me great hope for the future, that we will be able to transition into a parliament which is more suited to serving the people.
On that front, the way that you envisage the party almost sounds like the Greens to me. Where's the point of difference?
There's 2 points of difference. One, first of all, there's 3 points. We're not Marxists. The Greens are very much a philosophy based on that type of politics. But the main difference is that we strongly believe in financial sense. So all of the suggestions we're making for the next parliament are going to come from the funding that we've created by legalizing cannabis. We're not grabbing it out of the air and saying, someone else pay for it, that's a good idea, you pay for it. This is how we create that. And the second thing is that we're also a party of law and order, but I don't mean getting laws, I mean justice. So this is something we are very keen on, justice for everybody. And that doesn't mean being light on crime. It means actually, for example, with our problem with youth crime, we ought not to be punishing the criminals as such. What we should be doing is recognizing that the treatment began before such people were born. We need to give education to their parents. We need to give them a safe environment. We need to give them an early life, which is not characterized by drunkenness, by drugs, and by abuse of physical or sexual or mental abuse, so that children have the best chance to be who they should be in this life and not have to scrape to survive and then end up in the service of corrective services.
Before we go, I just wanted to tackle the actual state of the Australian medical cannabis industry at the moment. We touched on it before. I've got certain views. I see increasingly strengthened medical cannabis industry that, as I said, acts as an adult use, but they now have money to spend to try and stop people who might want to come into the market just to be in the retail business for adult use. I mean, how are you as a party looking at the best ways for structuring the industry now it's an industry? And are you also talking about sort of nitty-gritty stuff? A lot of product is being imported from other parts of the world. It's not being tested properly, but it has nice funky labels and everything looks great, and there's a doctor who will say this. The TGA obviously are completely drowned by the amount of information coming in, as far as I can work out. How are you seeing the sector at the moment, and what could be done to improve it?
Okay, remember, I'm a prescribing doctor. I still practice regularly in my clinic, and I am a major prescriber of cannabis. So I'll give you a nuanced answer, not only as a politician, but also someone who's working at the coalface. The cannabis medical industry has changed quite a lot. We had the initial enthusiasm, the flush of product coming in, the regulations which were overly burdensome and difficult it was impossible and expensive to obtain. And the companies flourished, but now they're pulling back and failing. So we're getting fluctuations in the market, getting poor quality, or at least it's the fluctuating quality as well. And bit by bit, the companies are sorting themselves out. There's two main approaches to cannabis prescribing in our society just now. One is the telehealth, which is basically cannabis legalized by stealth. You know, doctors say, what's your problem? What's some cannabis? Here's your cannabis. Next patient, please. That's giving you money. Whereas I very much take the medical view of, if you're needing cannabis, nothing else is working for you, where do we go? And I, for example, am particularly prescribing cannabis for ADHD and autism, also in children, with excellent results, as well as pain and mental health issues and a variety of things. So remarkable medicine. And we're using not necessarily a high dose of THC, but we're using cannabinoids and terpenes specifically. So the medical use of cannabis is very different from recreational use.
Well, that's why I feel that the message is being lost in Australia, because it's all being shoved down the same path, and then you've got to unravel it again. And this
is where we need to educate doctors. You're quite right. So it's an evolving business here, but really what we're facing just now is the need for doctors to become better educated in the medicinal uses of cannabis, and not what profit can I make from selling cannabis to people who will just use it to get high. Now, the problem, we've got the TGA, for example, a horrible organization. They are 96% owned by the pharma industry. And I am firmly committed to the concept that the pharma industry is a major cause or a problem in our health system, or sickness system, as I call it. We need to actually be more in tune with the need to live with nature and to let our bodies flourish in nature and not chemically induced. And that attacks our food processing industry, our pharma industry, and indeed the education of all doctors just now, and the ancillary services, which are all predicated on the idea of let people get sick and we'll give them a pill to make them better, or a treatment to make them better.
Yeah. No preventative, not enough preventative